Hey, it's Chris. Today I want to talk about the state of the iPad Pro. What I mean by that is I've been paying very close attention to various commenters across YouTube and other platforms, and there seems to be maybe 5 to 7 very common sentiments about the iPad Pro as it stands right now. So I want to discuss what the iPad Pro community seems to be saying the strengths are, what the limitations are, and what the future potential is, so that if you're making a buying decision right now, you're going to be well informed. Before we dig in though, I have a big announcement. My next course is now available to pre-order. It's called Pro iPhone Video Essentials. The reason I'm so excited is because you can make iPhone footage look amazing if you didn't realize everything you're seeing in this video is shot using a 4 iPhone camera setup. The iPhone shoots pretty decent video straight out of the box. This is what the iPhone 15 Pro Max looks like and sounds like. But with some professional knowledge, you can make your iPhone video really pop like you're seeing here. And that's what I'm gonna teach you how to do. If you pre-order, there's some great bonuses, including getting instant access to my hit course, Learning to Be Productive, right now when you pre-order. So that's linked up down below if you wanna check it out. Now, sentiment number one that I see floating around out there about the iPad Pro is that it's overpriced given what it does. So I see the sentiment popping up around the internet. How do you justify purchasing this over other devices? Maybe devices like the MacBook Air, or even a Windows tablet/computer combination. Well, I feel like a big part of that conversation comes down to a lot of people look at this as a web surfing device or something that you use to answer email or just watch Netflix or something like that. But the reality is this isn't just a gaming or content consumption light computing device like a lot of people just assume. There's this little thing called the Apple Pencil, and it allows for you to do some really interesting things, especially the Pro version. If you're a creative professional, this unmatched Apple Pencil precision is a must-have. If you're not a creative professional, then maybe this new Apple Pencil looks kind of like a splurge. And trust me, I get that. I keep coming back to the fact that the iPad Pro is an option among several great devices that you can choose from, and if somebody wants a Mac, then they can get the Mac with Mac OS. That said, Apple is billing this as a workflow workhorse, and I feel like that's becoming ever more the case. Now, I know that people like Snazzy Q are out there saying, well, look at all the things that the Files app can't do that I can do in Finder over on the Mac. And they're usually these little nitpicky things that are like minor inconveniences most of the time. I mean, I find that I'm not buying this to be another version of the Mac. I'm buying it because it's this transformer device that adapts to different parts of my workflow. And though it may be slower than some people would like, Apple does improve this in important ways over time. External display support, for instance, an update to Final Cut for the iPad, which now gives me control over 4 iPhones. Now, not everybody's a videographer, so okay. But being able to use this on my desk, as I've shown in the past, to anchor a desk setup, that's possible now. But that brings me to sentiment number 2. A lot of people view the iPad, even the iPad Pro, as a companion device. And you can make the argument that Apple is not going to make a crossover device that combines really the best of macOS and the best of an iPad into one device, like a touchscreen Mac sort of thing, because they do want to keep those separate. Some people are gonna say for sales, other people are gonna say, well, you need to guard the integrity of what the iPad is and what the Mac is. And there's no question that this is a really amazing companion device. It plugs into the ecosystem in a super unique way, fills a super unique spot. So I'm gonna be honest with you, when I'm sitting at my desk, I usually use my Mac as the anchor for my desk setup. That's where I do a lot of the heavy lifting for things like video editing. And my iPad often sits over to the side, closest to the door to my office, so I can grab it and go. And it really has become my portable device. If I'm gonna go on a plane, I bring the iPad with me because it's more portable, more adaptable. Same thing if I'm just going to a meeting or a coffee shop. I mean, this is becoming my go-to portable companion. And for me, it isn't either or. I don't have to use a Mac or the iPad. I actually like using them together with things like universal control, and each one sort of has a different slot that fits into my life. There are times and there are apps when this touch interface combined with the Apple Pencil are really the sweet spot, and I need to use that for a particular thing in my workflow. You know, for the new course, I use the Apple Pencil to kind of help me do some of the design work there, as you can see. And I feel like that really gives this a more authentic feel. It's not just a font, that's my actual handwriting. But then back on the Mac side of things, there are certain accessories and there are certain plugins and certain apps that I just don't have access to over on the iPad. So I turn to my Mac for those. Which brings me to sentiment number 3. A lot of people out there feel like the iPad Pro really shines in very specific use cases. So the question is, in which scenarios is the iPad Pro irreplaceable? The easy, straightforward answer is for digital art, for mobile photo and video editing, for presentations on the go. Nothing out there beats the iPad Pro. And I'm not just talking about on the Mac side of things. I mean, no other device beats the iPad Pro. The thing is, not everybody out there is a digital artist or a photographer or a videographer. And I feel like for those people that aren't those things, that's where the struggle really kicks in. And you're like, well, what makes this worth it for me? And the answer may be in those situations that it actually isn't irreplaceable. And it comes down to more of a budget issue slash even a preference issue. Sometimes you just prefer the iPad form factor over the Mac form factor because you can rip the screen off or attach a keyboard or use the Apple Pencil. It's all optional. And other times you don't want to use this, you'd rather use a Mac, And again, it doesn't have to be either or unless you're constrained by budget. If you're constrained by budget, then you might run into some frustration where you're like, well, I can't afford both, so I'm gonna have to make a decision. And then since neither one is perfect 100% of the time, which one is gonna fit my lifestyle, my workflow more often than not, most of the time? And by that point, everyone has a different sort of a job and workflow and scenario where they're gonna need their computer to come in handy. And it's hard to make a blanket statement over this is the device for this group of people and this is the device for that group of people. And you see that on YouTube. You see that in different reviews. Oftentimes it does come down to just being kind of a matter of personal preference and taste, or it's often something that's determined by a person's work scenario where their business is going to support a certain kind of device or use a certain suite of apps or something that's just not available on one device or the other. Now, one of the biggest updates that Apple has come out with in a long time for the iPad Pro is this new multicam capability in Final Cut Pro. And even if you're not a videographer, this is really exciting stuff because everybody shoots personal video, right? A lot of people out there own a business and they need to do some marketing, right? And so other people are aspiring to be a YouTuber or an influencer of some sort, which number one is why my new course on shooting pro iPhone video is gonna be so applicable to so many people because everybody watching this probably has an iPhone. But people called out for Apple to improve in this area for years, and they did. You have to remember, the Mac has been out for so long that they've been there perfecting and bringing all these feature requests. It didn't all happen overnight. It took a long time for the Mac to become the Mac, and that same thing is happening to the iPad slowly over time. So whatever the thing is that you're like, well, the iPad is missing that for me, for my workflow, for the pro apps that I actually need. Well, I think hang in there because that stuff is probably coming. But in the meantime, you're gonna have to make the decision well, what do I need to get my work done right now? And a lot of that discussion is going to come down to what apps are available for you to make use of. Because you hear this all the time. The hardware is great, really great, really nothing to complain about, but the iPad feels held back by the operating system, by the software, by the apps that are available. Yes, there's the App Store and it contains what it contains, but a lot of people also rely on cloud-based apps, and they go through Safari or a different browser to actually interact with the apps that they rely on for their business or for school. There are times when that works out, and there are other times where there's some frustration. Famously, Google stuff wasn't supported in the way that people needed, or Microsoft's suite of tools wasn't supported in the way that was needed for a long time. But over the years, a lot of that stuff has continued to make its way to the iPad, which means to the iPad Pro. I'm not sure if you've ever played around with Octane, but the ability to render these incredibly complicated scenes and scenarios, which is doing right now. If you're ever like, well, there's nothing that can even push the M4 chip to its limit, this is gonna take a long time to sit here and render, okay? The reality is that there's several Pro apps that are available for the iPad platform, including the Pro, that go beyond Apple's own Final Cut Pro or Logic Pro. This Octane render here with all the lighting and all the reflections on these digital objects is really pushing this chip and this device to the max. So when you're shopping online and you see comments like, there's no Pro apps for the iPhone, what that person really means is the Pro apps that they're envisioning or needing maybe aren't yet available. But that doesn't mean that as a platform, there aren't some really pro powerful apps that are just really niche that you probably have never heard of. And that's the kind of stuff that's just gonna have to build out over time. Now, the next sentiment I wanna bring up is that there's really nobody complaining about the hardware, other than to say, oh, hey, that's really expensive. That Magic Keyboard, that's expensive. Apple Pencil, expensive. iPad Pro itself, very expensive. But you do get what you pay for. And what you get here is some really premium computing power. Here's just an OLED demo video, and I mean, it's jaw-dropping, mouth-watering to have this screen available on the iPad Pro for when you're editing photos, videos, when you're watching content. Wow, that is a huge bonus. When I'm working with photo or video content now, usually with the Apple Pencil, it's nice to know for my creative projects, I'm getting all the accuracy that I need when I'm thinking about putting out a final product. But it's also cool on the consumer side when I'm watching content, looking at games, to get the best looking picture that you can basically get in a tablet. For how thin this thing is, the speakers, the mics, the camera, all of it is just very enjoyable. I've told you a million times over the years that the Magic Keyboard is my favorite typing experience for the iPad, and that hasn't changed. This new Magic Keyboard is so good. I love it personally. It's a good example of Apple listening to customers and improving things over time. Not only does it feel premium and look premium and is actually very premium, but it's got the function keys that were missing from the previous version. Apple listened and they added those in. And part of that hardware discussion brings me to the next sentiment, which is this instant on capability of the iPad Pro. The iPad Pro is just ready to go. You boot it up, it doesn't take long to boot up. You need to make a note, tap on the screen, and you're into Notes. That's a feature that's been around for a long time, but it's that instant nature of making things happen on the iPad Pro that people really love, that can really matter when it's time to be productive, depending on your workflow and your personality. And I've said this many times before, but there's a generation of people who are growing up and thinking in an iPad first sort of way, mentality. They're learning to do things on an iPad, and they don't have some kind of perception of like, well, such and such is a workaround, because they're not coming from a Mac background. And in fact, when they go over to the Mac, then they're like, oh, that's weird. Why would you do it like that when they're used to doing it over on the iPad? So, whatever you grew up with, whatever you're familiar with is really going to frame and in some ways kind of taint how you feel about maybe one or both of these devices. All we can really know for sure is that if you like the idea of an iPad right now, with the capabilities that it has right now, the software that it has right now, then you're probably going to continue to like it into the future. And if you're disappointed with any of those things right now, you're probably going to be somewhat disappointed in the future as well. Because for all intents and purposes, it looks like Apple has these two devices on their own tracks, and those tracks are never going to fully intersect or cross and become sort of this one device that quote unquote makes everyone happy. I don't think actually that making that device, that crossover device, does in fact make everyone happy. It makes a certain subset of users out there who want the iPad to be a Mac happy. But for a balanced conversation, we have to acknowledge that there's a ton of people out there who like the iPad for what it is right now. And this video is not about convincing anybody out there that they need to change their mind or anything like that. This is more for potential buyers trying to help you figure out, well, is the iPad Pro right for you? And for some people, the answer is yes. And for others, the answer is just gonna be no. And that's all there is really to this conversation. There are people out there who are reviewing the iPhone and the iPad and other Apple products, and it's just sort of a passing fad for them. They don't actually incorporate them into their workflow and rely on them in a professional sense, like I'm trying to do for my Apple reviews and the products that I'm talking about here. So I think when it comes to complaints especially that you see out there, you gotta look at the source and be like, well, is this person using this device all the time? Or for them, is this really just more of a way to get some views? Hopefully this was interesting and useful to you. Let me know if I missed any sentiments out there that maybe you have personally or that you've seen floating around that are kind of common to this discussion. Let's have a nice discussion down in the comments. Don't forget to check out the courses. Right now, if you pre-order, the bonus is that you get my Learning to Be Productive course 100% for free instantly when you buy the new course, Pro iPhone Video Essentials. Thanks for hanging out today, and I'll catch you in the next video. Later.